Eslanda Goode Robeson, black anthropologist and chemist. Born 1896, died 1965. Eslanda Goode Robeson had a varied career as a scientist, social activist, and wife of one of the most powerful black voices in the 20th century, Paul Robeson. As a chemist, Robeson was, according to most accounts, the first African American staff member of the Presbyterian Hospital of New York. Robeson left this position in the mid 1920s to manage her husband's career as an actor, singer, and activist. Paul Robeson's career took the family to Europe and beyond, where his wife became interested in anthropology, especially as it related to Africa. Robeson went on to earn her PhD in the subject. Robeson herself was also an activist in causes related to civil rights and colonialism, especially in Africa. Robeson was born on December 15, 1896, in Washington, D.C., one of three children and the only daughter born to John and Eslanda Cardozo Goode. John Goode worked as a clerk in the U.S. government's War Department. Eslanda Cardozo Goode came from a prominent free black South Carolina family. Her father was Francis Louis Cardozo, a Congregational pastor and noted black politician. Robeson's father died from the effects of alcoholism in 1902, when she was 6, and her mother moved the family to New York City soon after. The move was made in part so Robeson and her brothers could attend non-segregated schools. Robeson lived in Harlem and saw the beginnings of its Renaissance. After spending 2 years at the University of Illinois, Robeson returned home to earn her Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry from Columbia University in 1918. She also attended Columbia's medical school for 1 year. From 1918 to 1925, Robeson worked as a chemist and surgical technician, running Presbyterian Hospital Surgical Pathological Laboratory. While working at the hospital in 1921, Robeson met her future husband, then a Columbia University law student who was hospitalized with a football injury. They were married on August 17, 1921, and eventually had one child, Paul Jr., born on November 17, 1927. Robeson persuaded her husband to take a role in a YMCA theatrical production soon after they were married. Paul Robeson's rich voice and acting prowess led to his career as a singer and actor, and the couple's world travels. By 1925, Paul Robeson was engaged to appear in London, and Eslanda Robeson left her position at the hospital to become his manager. In 1928, the Robesons made London their primary residence, a situation which lasted until 1939. She wrote a biography of her husband in 1930 entitled Paul Robeson, Negro. The Robesons' marriage was somewhat rocky, and they spent several years separated after 1932. Robeson became interested in anthropology in this time period and began graduate studies at London University from 1935 to 1937, and the London School of Economics in 1938. She eventually earned her PhD in 1945 from the Hartford, Connecticut Seminary. Robeson's primary interest as an activist and anthropologist was people living under colonial rule, especially in Africa. In part because of her husband's work, Robeson's world travels allowed her to see firsthand the effects of such a system on its native peoples. Robeson was outspoken in her belief that independence was the only right and just government for Africans. Robeson made her first trip to Africa in 1936 to do 6 months of anthropological fieldwork, with her young son in tow. In 1945, Robeson published a book about the trip, African Journey, written in diary form. Though it was more personal than anthropological, it nonetheless descriptively cataloged the customs of several tribes, covered a scope of economic and social classes, and was generally praised by reviewers. In 1941, Robeson was one of the founders of the Council on African Affairs, an organization intended to garner support of national independence in Africa. The group lobbied against colonizing Africa and hoped the continent would be decolonized at the end of World War II. Though this would not be accomplished then, Robeson was the group's representative observer when the United Nations Founding Convention was held in 1945. Robeson also believed in fighting fascism in every form. In 1938, Robeson and her husband were in Spain, where they observed and supported those fighting dictator Franco's fascist government. Indeed, Robeson and her husband were staunchly left-wing in their politics, vocally supporting such socialist countries as the Soviet Union and China. These sympathies led to problems for Robeson and her husband, and she was called before the House of Representatives Un-American Activities Committee, led by Senator Joseph McCarthy, in 1953. She disavowed the committee and its agenda, earning her a reprimand. Robeson and her husband were labeled subversives and communist sympathizers. Because the HUAC, Robeson and her husband were denied passports for several years. In 1958, when they were finally allowed to leave the US, they moved to the Soviet Union, a country that they had first visited in 1934. During this time period, Robeson continued her work, noting events in America and abroad. For example, in 1958, she attended a conference in Ghana, an African nation that had recently gained its independence. Robeson went to the All-African Peoples Conference as the Council of African Affairs representative. While living in the Soviet Union, Robeson developed cancer and underwent at least one operation in that country. In 1963, the couple decided to return to the US. On their trip back, they stopped in East Germany, where she received the only accolades of her career, the Peace Medal and the Clara Zetkin Medal, awarded by the East German government. The latter was an honor specifically for women engaged in the struggle for world peace. After Robeson and her husband returned to the States, she continued to be politically active despite the cancer's recurrence. Robeson died of the disease on December 13, 1965. Citations are in the description.